What's up, my people? Happy Software Sunday. My name is Kevin Dowdy. I am the host of the series, and I'm a software engineer slash entrepreneur, and I help make the world a little better by creating technology that feels like magic. And today we're going to be going over a few of the most interesting stories that I've seen in the news regarding tech, AI, and just big business in the technology industry, and answer a few questions that I think would be helpful to just put some thought into for making all of us better as engineers, as technologists, and the like. And so, welcome to the show and let's get started. So, the first thing I wanted to just share is I heard about a story about a bug bounty program in for a number of different companies. There are companies like ADP, BBC, Microsoft, Meta. All of these companies have a program which is under the umbrella like a bug bounty program. And that basically means that they are crowdsourcing their security vulnerability research. So if you're a hacker or aspiring hacker, a penetration tester, and you're, able to discover any type of vulnerabilities inside of their products, whether it's Netflix's, content or geographic content blocker, or you're discovering some type of vulnerability in Microsoft Word that could expose user data. They have these programs that if you can research the bug, identify it, and then share a report with them to help them identify it for themselves, they'll give you a check basically to make sure first to encourage people to share the bug with them versus just finding it and exploiting it on your own, and to help make their products a little bit safer for the public to use. And so this program and these programs are a pretty interesting concept because it basically makes it so that it's not just that one company trying to figure out how do I secure my technology, how do I make sure that the data that we're having and holding is secure. It gives it to the community, which allows you to get more eyes in front of the product, which allows you to get more tests done, right? Like if you have 100 people can only do so much. But if you have 1,000 people looking at your product and saying, hey, how can I break it? And then actually sharing the results with you, it just makes that product much safer to use and much safer for the public. So it's a pretty cool initiative that a number of different companies have, and it's very lucrative if you're able to identify some of those vulnerabilities. There are some researchers and hackers that are just getting out of high school. You could be in high school and make $20,000 because you have some skill finding these vulnerabilities. There are some developers that they have made $600,000 in the last 6 years just by using these programs to make a living for themselves. And so it's a pretty lucrative opportunity for anyone that's interested. And it's exciting because, if anyone is familiar with some of the laws for the computer space and cyberspace, you actually cannot just, try to hack into a system. So like when I was in college, we had exercises where we could do a capture the flag, where your objective was to pretty much break into a network and access the data on a computer inside of that network. But this was like a really closed experiment and environment where we could even get in trouble if we picked the wrong network to hack into. And so there are a lot of laws and regulations for what you can do with a computer, even if you do find a vulnerability. So these companies give people that are interested a opportunity to test their skills. Like, you can actually go up against some of the greatest security experts in the world to see if your chops are a little bit better than theirs. Like, if you find the vulnerability that they haven't patched, then it definitely proves that you're competitive inside of that cyber warfare space. So it's really amazing if you're interested in it. Like I said, you can get a nice little check if you do it the right way, and they make it easier for you to test your skills without, risking yourself going to jail. Because who wants to go to prison, which you can do, just because you want to hack into something? So check it out if you're interested. It's a great opportunity for people in high school, people in college, or people that are anywhere, any role in your life. The cool part about it to me is the fact that you can actually demonstrate and improve your abilities by trying and practicing without having to rely on some type of company to hire you. You're basically creating an opportunity for yourself to learn and grow in the space and in the field. And then another story that I saw was that the EU is starting to cut back on some of the regulations that they made with their AI Act. If a few years ago, they were one of the first countries, first national blocks to create legislation to help regulate and control the growth of AI and artificial intelligence systems. They categorized certain systems based on their risk and how much of a blast radius those systems would have to affect the public. Like I said, this was one of the first regulations that we saw in the market, but they've gotten a lot of backlash from different companies and firms about the laws and regulations and how restrictive it is and how much it can potentially slow down innovation. And so they initially had, I think you probably had like 2 years or a year to make your system compliant. They're starting to, extend the amount of time that these companies have to make sure that their systems are compliant. And compliance is really just making sure there's documentation in place, making sure there's some type of data governance, risk management, and some pretty straightforward controls in place to make sure that these systems aren't just automating dangerous things or automatically doing things that would be considered dangerous to the public or any individual, especially taking over someone's rights. So the regulations themselves make sense, but when you're an incumbent, you might have the resources to dedicate to keeping track of changes in the law and making sure that your different teams are compliant. But when you're a new entrant into the market and you're just trying to innovate and build something new, you may not have the resources to dedicate to product development and compliance. And so that would be like a really clear reason why you may not want to have these types of hoops to jump through. And I know there are some caveats inside of the regulation where if there's less than 10,000 users, you may not fall under it, or you may not have to worry about it. But 10,000 users isn't really a large block. And so you can get to 10,000 users pretty quickly. And so if you're, like I said, if you're trying to innovate, that could be challenging in order for you to grow without having to look over your shoulder and being liable for certain fines. So I think it's a great thing that they're attempting to do to just make it easier to innovate in the EU. We're seeing other companies in other countries definitely moving a lot faster than the European market, just because we don't have those same types of regulations. But there is understandably risk when you don't try to control, or you know, when people are not aware of how they're developing these systems and just developing them for the profit's sake, or just to, you know, put something out into the market. There's some dangers inside of that type of process. So the idea behind regulation makes sense, but in practice, it just needs a little bit more time. Like, right, I think these systems were pretty new when they started regulating them. That can work sometimes and it can harm you in other ways. So maybe given the fact that they're giving companies more time to comply with these regulations would be super helpful, and it might give people the chance to innovate and build faster before they try to lock it down and make it more secure and do those other compliance specific aspects. But it's never a bad thing to advocate for data governance, for security, and documentation at the minimum. Like, you need to. It makes sense. It works. It's a good thing. So I hope that the companies that, like, even though they get this breather before they're going to get fined for it, I hope they don't use this as an opportunity to just disregard those aspects of development and engineering. Because at that point, then you might need to bring it back a little faster. And in that same theme of, I guess, why you need regulations for certain systems like this, OpenAI they were recently sued by a family because the family is claiming that ChatGPT either encouraged or did not do enough to stop their son from committing suicide. Right? So we have systems that are becoming more, integrated into people's lives. And these people are starting to rely on these artificial systems and these computer systems in order to help them understand reality. And these systems are pretty good. They're great, honestly. They're intelligent and they're useful, but they should not be used in order to decide whether or not you should or should not hurt someone or hurt yourself, like self-harm or harm to others. But ChatGPT may have, had a conversation with an individual that, led to their death. And there's another story where in a murder-suicide, the individual had hours long of conversations with ChatGPT before committing his acts. And so when you have hundreds of millions of people on these platforms, and I think OpenAI also released that less than 1% of their users are, experiencing mental health issues. 1% of 100 million or even a billion users, which OpenAI is getting really close to, is still a significant number of people and number of lives. And so it becomes even more important to have some type of risk management in place for these products and for these tools to make sure that, if someone is demonstrating some type of behavior that is dangerous to themselves or others, hey, do we have some type of strategy in place to route them to not just a different model, but to a person that they can actually speak to, that can help protect them and the people around them. And I'm not like saying that it needs to be hooked up to the police department or your local 911 office or something like that, but maybe having a connection to 311 or some type of mental health hotline that can help navigate these challenges that people are having without relying on these computer systems to take care of it on their own. And again, going back to the regulation, these types of challenges are going to create way more regulation for the industry as a whole, because when AI is responsible or involved in, dangerous situations, who is responsible for that? Is it the person, the user? Is it the developer? Or is it the people around them that just got caught in the crossfire? Without having some type of clear rules on these types of situations, we're not only are we're going to see more of them, we're going to start seeing the boundaries of these situations or these technologies impacting more dangerous situations as we start using AI in more areas of our life, including healthcare, housing, education, and the like. So something to keep in mind as you're building and as you're using these systems, that one, the regulation is not mature or in place to protect you. So you have to have some type of knowledge and awareness yourself to make sure you and your family is protected or are protected on these platforms. You can't rely on the companies to do it themselves for, for understandable reasons. It's not an easy challenge to solve for. And keeping your mental health in mind when you're using some of these tools, that they're not human. They don't have the empathy that a human and the experience that a human would naturally have or even could be trained to have. So you have to keep in mind when you're having certain conversations and sharing certain details, you have to know what topics can and should be discussed when you're talking to a pretty much like a computer, like a probabilistic machine, or it's non-deterministic, but there's still some probability and statistically created information with these tools. So it's not enough to trust in any area of your life. And then wrapping it up with just, finding these types of vulnerabilities. So it may not sound like vulnerability, but if you can discover how to break a chat model or an AI chatbot that, bypasses some of the content filters or the blockers, then you're basically creating a helpful solution to these companies, because they can't find all of the ways that someone might bypass the controls. So they need other people, other researchers, and other eyes looking at the problem and figuring out, how can I fix this? And so if you want to do a great service to the community and maybe protect some people, then maybe you help research and create reports on AI models, as well as the the Facebooks and the Netflixes of the world to just make everyone safer. And you might get compensated very well for it, because how much is a life worth? For real, how much is a lawsuit worth? I know OpenAI is willing to pay $1 million, or even less than that, to discover a breach in their content filters, because a lawsuit is gonna cost you 20 times more if it comes down to it. And so now that we discussed a little bit of the news in the market, I do want to get into a few questions that came up throughout the week for people that are from people that are interested in technology, and the people that are using technology in their lives, which really is everyone, right? We're all using a cell phone, we're all using a laptop, we're using some type of software with Netflix or Facebook, anything like that, right? We all have these technologies in our lives that we rely on. And if you're not aware of how they work, then you're at risk. So let's open up the first question from our folks.
How likely is it for an app to have a backdoor?
So, first of all, it's extremely likely. If you think about it, what a backdoor really is, it just means there is some other way to access the contents inside of this home. If you think about it from that standpoint, you as the user may not be aware of all of the entry points inside of the home. Especially if we're talking about a computer system where you don't even understand what makes up a computer. You don't understand that there are network vulnerabilities, or physically, if I connect a device to the ports available on that computer or phone or anything else. The backdoor just says there is another way to access this device or software. The challenge is how likely is it for this backdoor to be accessed by someone who is unauthorized? So if we're talking about your house, you and your family and the people you designate have a key, right? And you might have cameras in front of the front door. But how many times do you have a camera at the back door? And how possible is it for someone to break through the back door and access your home? And when they access it, can they steal your money? Can they attack your family? Like, whatever it may be, the back door is just another entry point that someone has access to. And when you don't understand the system holistically, you can't say whether or not that backdoor exists or not. And so, going back to the main question, it's extremely likely in closed source systems. And closed source systems mean any type of software or hardware where you don't actually have the blueprints, or even if you have the blueprints, have you looked at the blueprints to say, hey, what can these people access? Because sometimes the unauthorized party might be the manufacturers or the developers of that product, right? Amazon, AWS, in some of their AWS accounts, there is a role that allows an AWS customer support rep to access resources inside of your account. Apple, they may or may not have a way to access the data on your phone. And you may or may not be alerted to the fact that access is possible by people from their company. And that just becomes a trust issue, right? If they're not making it clear that uh, this access way or this backdoor exists, then that's a problem. But let's say that someone is able to get access to their system, or some employee is able to access something that they're not supposed to be able to access, and the backdoor exists inside of your hardware or your software. Now you have someone that is unauthorized and that you don't know accessing data that could be really sensitive. Having a closed source system, or a system that you're ignorant of the way it works or the things that it includes, is one way to almost guarantee, or you might as well assume that there's a guarantee of backdoor access or backdoor possibilities. Um, but then there's also the alternative, open source open source software, which is software that the source code is public and available for anyone to take a look at. And that's the same as saying, I created this, or I made this report, but I'm sharing all the notes on the report and how I came to my conclusions. Or I'm sharing the blueprints for the house that you're buying that says, this is where this light bulb is, or this is where this door is, this is how many, this is the type of lock on the door, right? And open source software is usually public for anyone to see. But the way I would describe it, like I've heard people say, like, or ask the question, how is open source software more secure than closed source software? And it's the fact that if I can tell what type of lock is on your door, that doesn't mean I have the key to that door. But it does mean that I can say beyond a doubt that this type of lock is sufficient to block someone from just kicking it down, or someone from just picking it. Like, I can actually look at all of the other people who have that type of lock, or I can look at some of the reports from the manufacturer of that lock and say, oh, this lock is good in these types of situations, or this drywall is flammable or non-flammable up to this certain temperature. Basically, having open source software gives you a type of guarantee that, hey, this software or this system it gives you some visibility into it. And the visibility doesn't make it more secure, but it does give you more confidence that, hey, I know exactly how this works. I know where the back door is. And if I don't feel like the backdoor controls of the security that exist for my back door are sufficient, I can add another door, or I can change the lock, or I can, add some cameras or add an alarm. There's something else I can do because I have access to the way that this system has been designed, the blueprints. Having the blueprints doesn't make the house more structurally sound, but you get a little bit more confidence to know, hey, this house will not be okay if the winds are 100 miles per hour, but it will be okay if they're 60 miles per hour, right? So just keeping that in mind. Nothing is guaranteed to be secure like forever, but we can kind of count on some level of security.
How do I delegate tasks to a junior developer?
So when we're thinking about delegating tasks to a junior developer or a junior engineer, you have to understand the level of competency for the different roles and what you can expect from these different levels. So if you have a senior or staff level engineer, they can be, or you're kind of expecting them to be able to take some type of abstract problem or objective and be able to speak to the right people, ask the right questions, and own that problem set from start to finish, and making sure everything gets done on time and to a certain level of quality. At the junior level, we need to understand that those engineers, although they may be coming with a lot of enthusiasm, they may not have the same level of ownership inside of the project, where they may not know the right questions to ask. They may not know who to ask these questions to, and they may not be able to understand how to own that problem from start to finish. So if you're delegating a task to them, you should align with what type of expectations that they'll have, or the needs that they'll have, in order to ensure that the problem is solved or the objective is met. So making sure they understand how much leeway that they have, how much time that they have. You have to be very clear up front with that to them. You should set up sessions to align with progress, because they may not be able to own it on their, like, you can't just leave them for 3 months and say, hey, do this, and expect them to get it done. They may need a little bit more hand holding. They may need a little bit more support to know, like, maybe we need to speak, if not a few times a day, but maybe daily or weekly or monthly. Like, that's the level of agency that they have definitely differs between different levels. So keeping that in mind when you're delegating these tasks or giving these tasks to a junior. As a junior, they're going to try to, or a good junior is going to try to do as much as they can without, asking for help. That could be a good thing and a bad thing, because they might mess around and just keep hitting a wall, but they haven't asked for help, and now they're taking longer time than necessary for a task that they don't have that much time to work on. And so you have to have some type of quality gates in place to make sure that you're checking in with them at the right times, so that they're not spending too much time on a problem that you actually, as a leader or their manager or mentor, could just give them the answer. And so you don't want to give them the answer too early, but you don't want them spending too much time on something that can be easily solved. As a junior, they may not have that type of awareness and experience to know when to do either. So if you're thinking about how do I delegate some tasks to my junior team members so that they can start doing something that I need, just again, be aware of how much agency that they'll need, and be aware of how well they are at breaking down the problem to turn a problem that's really 6 months into bite-sized subtasks that they can actually handle. Another challenge you'll have with the junior engineer, and it's not a challenge that can't be solved, but something to keep in mind, they may not understand the business objective to a technical problem, whereas they're ensuring that the tests for a certain API are more automated. They're only concerned with, how do I automate these 50% of tests so that engineers can only focus on the more difficult or complex other 20 tests for the app. As an engineer or a junior engineer, you're only concerned with hitting those numbers because that's what you're concerned with. From a business perspective, you're trying to ensure that the product is more reliable. So you definitely need to make sure the tests are being done. But if you're trying to put out more updates more quickly, having a lot of your engineering resources focused on testing is taking away from the time and energy that could be put into development and new feature implementation. So a junior may not understand why we're trying to increase the number of automated tests, but it's important for you. It may not be important for them to know, but as someone who is delegating the task to them, you may feel it's important to let them know, or you should let them know, hey, this is why this is important. This is what your task is going to help improve inside of the overall business. And so just keep that in mind when you're delegating the task. There's some information that they may need or may not need that you may have context and awareness of that is important or not important to share. And, you know, play around with that. You know what you need, and you know what, and you need to ask them what they need. Because maybe they need to know that context in order to help.
How do I improve my chances of landing a role?
So when you think about chances, it's just probability, right? You improve the likelihood that you'll land a role by applying to more roles and getting yourself out there more than you currently are. And it's at this point, it seems like it's really just a numbers game. There are a lot of changes in the market right now, but you still have to send out applications. You still have to connect with people in your network and at the places that you want to work so that they're aware of what you do and how you do it and why you do it, so that they could eventually at some point, possibly, right? It's no guarantees, bring you in. And so you can solve those problems with them. In my experience, or I think in anything, you have to understand the actual success rate of anything is extremely low. Like, I know when you're in school, like everyone wants like 100%, or you got an 80%, or whatever it may be. Like, that's in school. Those types of percentages are considered good. If you had a 65%, that would be bad inside of school. But if you think about real metrics for every other part of life, your success rate is gonna be like maybe 5%. Like, maybe 5% is pretty good. When I'm looking at applications, or when I'm getting, inquiries for a new rental or an open unit, I might get hundreds of people that reach out to me. It's only one person that's gonna make it into that unit. And even the people that, if I start from the beginning, I get 100 people that see it, right? The views. Then you might get 50%, 50 that actually reach out and say, I'm interested. You might get 10 that actually come in for a tour. You might get 4 that apply. And you might get 1 that actually meets your requirements. That's a 1% conversion rate. I think if you really look at conversion rates in any other thing, like for sales, which is what you're doing as an engineer, applying the roles, you are selling your services. If you look at products, how often does a viewer become a customer? Those numbers are extremely low. And I say that to say because it's gonna require way more effort and time out of you to make sure you are hitting all of your goals. If your goal is to land a role by X date, you need to make sure you have submitted at least Y number of applications. It might be 1,000. If you have a conversion rate of 1%, in order for you to actually land a role, you need to apply to 100 jobs. If it's, you're more likely to land that role if you apply to 1,000 jobs faster, right? It's that same 1% exists. Honestly, 10% might be great. The odds of 10% hitting is pretty low. Like, I don't think everyone is gonna be the 10%. Or even if you think about like golf, baseball, let's say passes inside of football, your numbers are not gonna be that high. So we gotta just understand that a little bit more. If you want to improve your chances, do more. You gotta do more, apply more effort, apply to more places, reach out to more people. You gotta put your feet down and work. That'll be the best way to improve your chances, or to make it more likely that you actually get the role. I don't know if it's really improving your chances, because probability is probability, right? It just, you're more likely to have gotten it in 1 month if you apply to 100 roles versus if you applied to 10 roles. At 10, you don't even hit the 1% mark, right? Like, one offer is not even at the 1% mark. So it's almost impossible for you, if at a 1% conversion rate, for you to actually get a role if you only apply to 10 roles. Just keep that in mind. It might be some of the easiest things you'll ever do, though. So it's not that hard.
When should I add comments into my code?
So that's like a good code quality question. And I know, definition of done, quality, these are pretty team specific rules. Like, your team might not use comments. I don't know why. But there are really some developers that don't use comments. It's strange to me, but you might document somewhere else. I like to use comments to explain what is going on and to explain why. I say to explain what because if I'm using some type of method, or I'm calling a helper function inside of my code, and I don't have any comments or any notes on what that function does, then in order for me to understand what that function call does, I would need to go through the entire method and kind of find out by reading through the code. Versus if I had a comment or description about what that method does, its inputs and outputs, then I could look at the comment and say, oh, this is what that line does, right? So having comments to describe the what makes it easier when someone else, or even the future you, is debugging to say, what's going on here? I need to understand it. It's like just like logs are helpful for observability, So are comments. Because when you're looking through a log, it just tells you this is what happened then. When you're looking through the code, you need to understand where in the code did this actually happen. And then for the why, sometimes you might have some type of logic or some condition that runs, or you might put some instruction in a particular place inside of the code where naively someone might think it's okay to put that instruction anywhere, but you're like, no, based on some type of whatever it might be some type of problem that you've seen in the past, or some domain expertise that you have now that says, hey, this instruction needs to happen before this instruction. Having that type of insight documented in your code, it's going to be super helpful for you and people in the future who might have to maintain that code base. Because the worst thing that can happen is a problem was experienced and then a change was made in the code to solve that problem. And now a month later, someone else different is inside of that code that rolls back the change that was made, and now the problem is happening again, and the same problem, the same issue, and now they need to go back at it again and fix that problem. But the knowledge for why the solution worked was already done. It already existed, but it hasn't been, it wasn't held, or it wasn't in a place where someone else could benefit from that knowledge. That's what you're trying to avoid when you add a comment inside of code. You want to avoid someone else having to recreate the will, or having to even redefine why we need a will. That should be clear so that they can focus on adding new features and functionality.
What have you learned from being a software engineer?
So this is a super interesting question, and I originally heard it from a middle schooler. It could have been, I think, sixth grade this week. And it got me thinking about what have I learned from nearly a decade of writing software. And I say writing software because I've been writing code since I started in college. I've been a software engineer for less than that, maybe about 5 years. And in that time, I've learned to think systematically. And that means I understand or am aware now that a change in one part of my life, or one part of a system, because your life is a system, right? But also society is a system, and your phone is a system. There are different parts and components that interact together in order to accomplish some type of goal. When I started learning about being a software engineer, I started understanding that aspect of, hey, what is a system? And how do I understand and be aware that changes in one part of the system may affect another part of the system? So that's been like one of the best lessons I've learned, because it's applicable in every area of your life, right? Everything is a system. Our entire, even just beyond society, we're in a solar system. The sun and the gravity of the moon affects things that happen on the earth, and the same with other planets inside of our solar system. And so understanding that and being able to think about that conceptually has been super helpful in just my growth. And I've also learned how to break down problems into more digestible and manageable parts, right? If you're looking at how do I build a building, that's a really big goal I have. I want to build a building. But maybe you don't need to build the building. Or maybe that doesn't need to be your focus. Maybe you need to speak to someone that knows how to build the building. Or maybe you need to lay a foundation. Or maybe you need to, after you lay the foundation, uh, you know, add the structure. And you get what I mean? Like, there are different steps that need to be done before you can accomplish that entire goal. You don't eat a sandwich in one bite. You take little bites until you're done. And at some point, you'll have finished the whole sandwich. You'll have finished the entire building. Understanding that problems can, big problems are difficult to solve. Small problems are easy to solve. I've learned that don't try to solve a big problem. Try to make it a smaller problem and then solve those consistently and strategically. And when breaking down a problem, I always break down the problem to an amount that I actually have the skill and the resources to solve, right? I don't break down a problem smaller but still outside of my skills or my ability. I break it down just enough for me to say I can do this and I do that, and then I have my next problem, which I'll break down just small enough for me to actually accomplish it. And then I've learned to apply effort consistently. And this is something I've learned from even when I first started writing code and debugging why my app wasn't compiling, because there was a semicolon missing inside of my code. And imagine working and having red all over your screen for days and weeks at a time. It wasn't weeks, it was days at a time because a semicolon was in the wrong place. And that was in college. And then moving into my early career, I've had problems that, I'm dealing with debugging why a log is showing incorrect data, or, caching some type of data that it shouldn't be showing in other requests. And being able and willing to keep working at that problem for a significant amount of time. Again, going back to, it takes way longer than we think to do anything that we want to do. And so if you're not willing to roll with the punches and keep rolling with the punches for as long as possible, you're going to have a very difficult time. Thinking critically is not just having a good idea, it's being able to think about something long and hard for as long as you can. That's how we solve problems, and that's how an engineer builds things that never existed before. We're solving problems that exist with the tools that we have, and it's never going to take a day. It's going to take weeks, months, and years sometimes. So being able to keep showing up consistently with enthusiasm while you approach problems is gold in any engineering role, and honestly in any area of your life. And there's some final thoughts that I had. So this week, I actually saw a post about imposter syndrome. And it said that imposter syndrome doesn't mean that you're unqualified. It means that you're growing faster than your confidence can catch up. And that got me thinking about what imposter syndrome really was and what it really is and how does it show up in my life. And I realized that there are two types of imposter syndrome. And one is like a retrospective imposter syndrome where you're thinking, I did it, but I don't know how I did it, or I wasn't supposed to have done it, or whatever it may be. You're looking back and saying that the person who did it wasn't really you. And the other part is like a future imposter syndrome. And it's like, I'm not sure I can do this thing, even though you've done similar things in the past. And both are coming from the fact that you don't believe that you are who you are. So it's almost like a lapse in understanding of reality, because you're the one that solved every problem that occurred in your life. You're the one that has been resilient enough to keep going even when things were tough. You're the one that keeps stretching and learning and growing so that you can learn and do all these different amazing things in your life. And I understand that it's sometimes you'll experience a moment where you're like, I have doubt. And that doubt is sometimes difficult to shake. It's difficult to shake because I think as humans and as people, I think doubt is so natural and so ingrained in us, not just from society and the way we grew up in our experiences, which can totally add on to that doubt. But it's the fact that I think just naturally, it's almost like a fear response. You gotta have some type of doubt because it might keep you alive, or in the past, it has kept you alive. And so I'm not saying you have to get rid of doubt. I'm saying even when you doubt, you have to build like the muscle memory and the ability to say, yo, I'm gonna do it regardless. Like, I might hesitate, but I'm gonna have built the muscle to say, even if I'm doubtful, my reflex is towards action. I'm gonna do it anyway. If once you have that type of active mindset, and not just mindset, like you really do it, when the first thing you do when a problem happens is, let me move and do this or do that, versus saying and sitting in your doubt and not doing anything. You want to make it so easy and so commonplace inside of your life that hesitation or doubt, not even hesitation, when doubt happens, you don't hesitate. You want hesitation to be far from you. And that's easy to do. You can build a reflex inside of your life where you just do it. Right? And look, you'll either trust that it'll work, or you'll mess around and find out that it don't work. And you just gotta have, I don't want to say it's courage, but even if you find out that it didn't work, you'll learn something from the experience. And it'll, in the event that it doesn't work, you'll still have grown because of it. So, for anyone that is experiencing imposter syndrome and doubting either what they've done or doubting what they can do, just remember, confidence follows competence. And The only way to test if you're competent is to get in the ring and try it. So this week, I encourage all of you and all of us to do the thing that feels scary. Do the thing that you don't know if it's gonna work, and keep doing that thing until you either get it to work or learn what works. So with that being said, again, happy Sunday, everyone. I hope you enjoy your evening and you enjoy your week. And good luck and be great. Talk to you soon.